Computer Programming for Kids, Step 25. Tripping on the Steps, and another round of refactoring. In the last step, we left off with a question as to whether we should do one of two things to try to fix the bug we're chasing. The first option was to remove the +1 from this line of code. Shows the line of code. I ran the code again with that change, and it did solve that particular problem. The label now goes from question 9 of 10 to question 10 of 10 instead of jumping from question 9 of 10 to question 11 of 10. Good. However, as mentioned earlier, there is usually a however. On taking a fresh look at how the code was organized, I noticed that it was a bit scattered and convoluted. For example, the freeze answer variable is assigned before it needs to be. It is assigned near the start of the load next batch method, but its value is not referenced. That is to say, nothing is done with it until much later. Since its value is based on the state of global variables, accessible from anywhere within form1.cs, it makes more sense to assign its value just before referencing it, rather than way ahead of time. So I moved that line of code from where it was to the checked changed event handler of the radio buttons just before it is referenced. And because the code seems to be a bit haphazard, it's time for another round of refactoring. And this is real world. This is the way it works in programming. Lots of refactoring. Refactoring. Not retrofactoring, although that kind of makes sense too. Let's get back to basics and think about just what it is our app is doing from the point where the user begins to interact with it. 1. They select a CSV file from the combo box. 2. That CSV file is loaded into a list with each item or class instance in the list holding a set of question, candidate answers, and which answer is correct. The first question and candidate answers are populated in a label. This is step 3. The first question and candidate answers are populated in a label and the radio button's text properties. The label above the progress bar also becomes question 1 of 10, or however many questions the CSV file holds, 1 of 17 or 1 of 10 million. 4. The user selects an answer from among the radio buttons and can keep selecting or changing their mind until they click the next button. When ready for the next question, the user selects the next button. That's step 5. Then it all repeats from number 3, but replace first question with next question until another file is selected when number 1 and number 2 repeat before continuing on. The only change in this repeating process is once the last question is reached. At that point, selecting a candidate answer acts as the next button has until now. But as there are no more questions to ask, the last question and the answers remain the same until the user selects a new CSV file from the combo box. Fairly simple, really, so we should be able to make the code simple and straightforward, too. It seems like all the updating of the form should be done in one place, don't you think? There should be one method dedicated to doing just that. So, besides the event handlers, particularly 1, selecting an answer among the radio buttons, and 2, clicking the next button, there should basically just be 2 other major methods. The one that loads the CSV file after the user selects it from the combo box, and the one to update the form with each new question. The method that loads the selected CSV file already exists in the form of the selected index changed event handler method. But since the name combo box select multi-choice file _ selected index changed doesn't imply what its code currently does, let's create a method with that name and then call it from the selected index changed event handler. To do that, create a method named populate list just below the selected index changed event handler method. It should look like this, and then the empty new method is shown. Now, copy all the code from the combo box select multi-choice file _ select selected index changed event handler method into there, everything between the curly braces, and call the populate list method from the temporarily empty selected index changed event handler. The event handler method should now be, and it shows that, it's just calling populate list. Note, this change may have seemed rather time-wastical, but having methods with descriptive names helps you to remember to only put code in that method that matches its name. If you start going off on a tangent and doing other things in there, you are hopefully reminded to move that stuff out into a separate method. Looking through it closely, there is an extraneous call in our new populate list method when it calls load next batch. We could change the name of the new method to populate list and load first set of records or something, but that's a bit long-winded and goes against the programming principle of having a method do only one thing. So let's move that call from populate list to the selected index changed event handler so that it is now, and it shows that code, calling two things now, populate list and load next batch from the event handler. In fact, we could and should make the event handler a little safer by practicing defensive coding, preparing ourselves for unexpected things that might happen. So let's surround our code with a try-catch block so that it ends up like this. And then it shows the fuller version of the selected index changed event handler. All right, that ended up being quite a makeover, or at least a non-trivial one. Now, as for the method to update the form with each new question, we basically already have it, but it's named the method we were just talking about, load next batch. But on second thought, that's kind of an unfortunate name. Load next batch of what? Ginger snaps, also known as molasses cookies? I wish. To avoid the vagueness and the temptations of the thoughts that it invokes, let's change the name to update the form. Note, it is good software design to give methods descriptive names. And if you first follow the tenet that each method should only do one thing, we had gotten away from that a little, naming it should be pretty easy. Just ask yourself, what does this method do? In this case, we could say, it updates the form. So, update the form is a logical choice for the name. Change the name of the method this way. Go to the load next batch method in the code. Select the name of the method with your clicker, your mouse. Right-click and select Rename from the context menu. You will see this, and it shows what you will see in a screenshot. Note how the screenshot implies that it will rename all the references to load next batch for us. That's one of the myriad ways that Visual Studio aims to please by helping you out where it can, without getting in the way, like WordPress says you want to do by trying to guess what you are writing and erroneously finishing words for you. Number 3, with load next batch highlighted, change it to update the form. Number 4, select the apply button in the rename load next batch dialog. Voila! Which is French for wallaby. I don't know why they say that. And then it shows a picture of a wallaby with a caption. Now it's time for another desk check, which, if you remember, means we gawk at our code on the screen trying to locate any obvious mistakes or oversights, and marveling in the wonder of it all. Sometimes. I'll give you however long you want to do that. You can pause this video if you want. Aha! Note this code in the section of the newly renamed populate list method. And it shows that code. Part of it. A snippet. What does everything after mcclist.clear have to do with populating the list? Answer? Ganz und gar nichts. That's German for nothing at all, really. So, we will move that code out to a separate method. Since this is done when we are starting fresh with a new set of questions, let's name this method initialize form. For now, Move those 3 lines of code into the new initialize form method. We may find other things that belong there later. It should look like this, and it shows that new method with the 3 lines of code in it. Don't forget to call initialize form from where those lines of code used to be. That snippet of code we looked at earlier should now be, and it shows it, stripped down. Also, I moved the call to update percentage correct from the next button's click event handler to the update form method. So the click event handler is now simply this, and it shows that code also stripped down. And the update the form method now calls update percentage correct here, adding a line of code there. There's another couple of things I noticed that would make the app easier to understand, namely to restrict the count of numbers after the decimal point in the percentage label to 2, and to append n of n to that percentage label so users don't get confused between how many questions they have answered and which one they are currently on. For example, after 3 answers, those labels above the progress bar could read question 4 and 66.67%, 2 of 3. So before returning to stepping through the code, let's take care of those 2 things real quick, as they say. To restrict the count of numbers displayed past the decimal point in the percentage label, LBL percentage, and to then append a n of n explanatory note to that string, change this code in update percentage correct. And it shows 1 line of code changing to a couple of lines of code to take care of that. The call to math.round and the to argument restricts the real value to 2 integers, such as 3.14 instead of 3.1415926539. Our old friend, the string.format utility method, replaces the placeholders with the current values of the 2 int variables passed to it, correct answers and questions answered. So label percentage could end up displaying, for example, 83.33%, 5 of 6. Some of you are whining, when are we going to get back to stepping through the code? And can relate to some of these dogs, and it shows some dogs, tired out, with captions. Well, your whininesses, and you others who persevered stoically, yearning for more stepping, but intrepidly marching forth, valiant while in duress, and uncomplaining, although beset by a myriad maladies. In our next step, we will get back to stepping through the code. We have refactored it to make it more sensible and understandable, but whether it works exactly as we need it to remains to be seen. We will find out in the next installment in the one and only Computer Programming for Kids journey that exists in the entire universe, as far as we know anyway. Until then.